doing this. What I did was I made sure that he's going to have to fold hands like jacks and tens, maybe even queen jack. I'm probably going to pick up the pot against those kinds of hands. He's probably just going to have to give it up. But I really found out where I was at. He had the 3 nines, and I sort of got him to tell me that I had no chance to win the pot. The chances that I hit a queen and an ace on the next 2 cards, or ace-ace, are obviously very slim. So for a relatively small portion of my stack, I was able to find out that I was beat. And the flop is a great time to gather that kind of information, but you need to make the bets that allow you to do that.
Okay, let's look at another one of my favorite tells, and this will be a tell of strength as opposed to a tell of weakness. We have a 3-way pot here, and the flop comes down a couple of 6s and a 7. Jim's in first position, and he checks, and Jared is next to act, and he checks, and now we've come up to Jai, and he's just sort of kind of staring at the pot. He doesn't know the actions to him. In fact, it takes the dealer to kind of jar him and let him know that it's to him. Sometimes it's the dealer, sometimes it's a player that says, hey, it's to you. This happens very often, and strangely, and almost counterintuitively, it seems to happen a lot when someone has a very big hand. Now, it's not like he's been just looking off into space and he's not interested. He's kind of like looking at the pot, but he doesn't know it's to him. And then when he's told that it's to him, he immediately goes, oh, yes, and then he grabs some chips, and he makes a sizable bet into the pot. I have never ever seen anyone bluff after this happens. Basically, you're almost embarrassed. You didn't know the action was to you, and it is very unlikely that somebody, after being informed that they didn't know the action was to them, would then have the wherewithal to try and bluff into the pot. Because you have to understand, when people are bluffing, they want things to be just right. They don't want to be able to look back and go, whoa, I was so stupid. Why did I bluff into that pot? And certainly, having the dealer or another player inform you that the action is to you, it gives someone an excuse not to bluff, even if they might have been thinking about bluffing. The fact that, and almost the embarrassment of the fact that they were told that the action is to them, would stop them from bluffing. So when someone doesn't know the action is to them, and then they're informed of that, and then they make the bet, just about 100 out of 100 times, they're actually going to have a very big hand. This is actually a sign of extreme strength when someone makes a bet like this.
Okay, now we're going to move on to 4th Street play, and actually in this example we're going to start from the beginning of the hand, and one thing you need to remember is we can be talking about the flop or 4th Street or 5th Street betting, but every decision you make in a no-limit hand, you're using all the information available to you, all the action that's happened from the beginning of the hand to the point of that action. Now, the key decision that's going to be made on this hand is on 4th Street, and it actually is one of my favorite plays. So I'm going to start this hand from the beginning, and let's say you have an ace-10 suited, a nice hand on the button, everyone's folded to you, and you're just in against the blinds. It's 1 and 2 blinds. And let's say you open the pot for 600, and the small blind folds, and the big blind calls. So there's 1,300 in the pot. And now we have a flop. And certainly it's a good flop for your hand. You flop top pair with a 10 kicker. Your hand could be beat, but certainly you wouldn't throw this flop back. And the big blind checks, which certainly you'd expect him to do with a lot of hands. He could have you beat. He could really have nothing here, but you're certainly going to bet. You have a good hand. There's 1,300 in the pot. Let's say you bet about 900. Seems like a good bet there. A little less in the pot. And let's say the big blind calls. So if we pause the action here, if I'm playing this hand, I'm now putting my opponent on a range of hands, and I'm looking at the texture of the flop, I'm looking at the cards in my hand, and I'm thinking about everything that's happened in the hand so far. And pretty much I have my opponent down to about 4 possible hands. I think he certainly could have an ace, and it's possible, but not very likely, that that ace could be larger than my 10 kicker. He might have an ace-queen or an ace-jack. He might even be playing an ace-king very strangely, but it's possible he has an ace-king or an ace-jack. If he has an ace, I think it's more likely that my 10 kicker is good. He could have an ace-5 or an ace-7 or something like that. He could also have an 8, where he just thinks like maybe I'm on a move, maybe I don't have an ace, and he's just going to call at least one more time with an 8. Something like an 8-10 or something like that to just, see if I'm bluffing. And certainly he could have a heart draw. He probably doesn't have a straight draw. That would be like a 3-4 or 4-5 here. It's not that likely he would have called me before the flop, and certainly drawing it in inside straight. So I pretty much have him down to 4 hands at this point. And now let's look at the turn. There's another 8. And he checks. Now, certainly in a tournament situation, if you're looking at your chips, and these white chips are $500 chips, so we've got about 7,000 in chips here. There's about 3,000 in the pot. And our opponent has us covered, or he has about the same amount of chips. So one thing I'm not looking to do is go broke and get knocked out of the tournament with a hand like ace-10 on a flop like this. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to reduce this hand down to about a one-bet hand. And if you look at the range of hands I was talking about, he could have an ace with a better kicker, and certainly if he has like an ace-king, I don't want to bet here. If I bet about the size of the pot here, and I bet 3,000, and he has like an ace-king, and now he puts me all in, it's kind of hard to just fold for 4,000 more. I mean, I'm going to be getting 4 or 5 to 1, so I might actually lose all my chips to an ace-king. Likewise, if he has like an ace-5, and I bet about the pot, there's a very good chance he's going to fold. I'm actually going to let him get away from this hand. You know, the 8 hits, he's worried maybe I have an 8, and if I do have an ace, I'd probably have his ace-5 out-kicked. And also, if he has an 8, I don't want to bet. Same problem as if he has an ace-king. He's probably going to raise and put me all in, and I might actually have to call. I might fold, but I'm going to be pretty sick about it, and I'm going to be short on chips. If I knew for sure that he had a flush draw, obviously I'd bet. I would bet about the pot, and I'd probably win the pot. But only 1 out of the 4 hands is a hand that I would want to bet against. This is actually a great time, I think, to check, and I don't see a lot of people making this play. But I think you ought to check, because against 3 of those 4 hands, a check is very good. And actually, against the flush draw, it's not a terrible decision to check, because you might induce a bluff. And if you look at the 4 hands I was talking about, the check is actually very strong against 3, and maybe even works against the other. So if the last card comes some kind of a blank, let's try and find a blank here. There it is. We're very happy that we checked against this hand. Now he's probably going to bet like 2,500 or 3,000, and we're going to call. But now we've only lost 2,500 to the ace-king. If he has an ace-5, he may bet, he may check. But either way, you're going to win another bet from him that you may not have won if you had bet on 4th Street, because he might have folded and gotten away from the hand. So if he checks and now you bet, it's going to be very hard for him to fold a hand like ace-5, because he's thinking, well, maybe he missed his flush draw and now he's trying to bluff me. I mean, once you check on 4th Street, he's putting you on a weaker hand than you have. And he might even be confident enough that he actually thinks he has the best hand, and now he's betting. Obviously, against the 9-8, you're happy you checked. You're probably going to have to call one more bet, but again, you're still going to be in the tournament, and you lost the minimum on the hand. And against the flush draw, there's a very good chance that after you check and show weakness, that he's now going to try a bluff. So actually what you're doing by checking is you're allowing yourself to actually make money on the river. And in fact, if you bet on 4th Street, there's almost no way for you to make more money in the hand. You're just trying to win the pot. But actually by checking, there are a lot of scenarios, certainly against the ace-5 and against the flush draw that miss, you can actually win an extra 2,500 that probably isn't possible for you to win if you bet on 4th Street. So you need to think about these things. Now certainly you're using all the information, and you need to narrow your opponent down to a very specific number of hands to be able to make a play like this. But sometimes everything falls right, and you can really make a nice sort of positive, aggressive check on 4th Street, like the one I just showed you here. I wanted to talk about a very important 4th Street concept, and that is taking advantage of scare cards. 4th Street is a very good bluffing round. In some ways, it's better than 5th Street, and that's because not only does your opponent face your bet on 4th Street, but if he's wrong and you aren't bluffing, he may be looking at a bet that is quite larger on 5th Street, and even possibly for all his chips. So actually you have a lot of leverage on 4th Street to bluff. I've got 3 flops laid out here, and I have 3 hands for 1 hand for each flop. You know, they're all marginal hands, and of course, you know, with the 7, 8, 9, 10, you're looking to make a straight, and here you have a pair and an inside straight draw, and again we have an up and down straight draw on the bottom hand. These are all marginal hands. Of course, you're trying to hit your straight and maybe win a big pot. But I'm going to turn over 4th Street